Hello, everybody. My name is Lukwesa Morin. I am also Miss African Union 2019. And first off, I really want to thank the African Students Youth Summit for including me in such a vital conference on education and how we can build back as student leaders, as youth organizations and global organizations to keep progressing forward in light of the global pandemic that we are all continuing to grapple with. And one of the biggest things we see now occurring across the world is virtual learning that's taking place as a result of the restrictions that COVID has put on social interactions. So, as chief delegate of the master plan, one of our SDGs is focused around education initiatives and ensuring that that's brought to the forefront throughout different nations. As we all know, in developed nations, most children have access to internet as well as digital devices. So they've been able to learn and develop during this time. And while it's not an ideal learning environment, the issue of this pales in comparison to third world countries and developing nations where they do not have those same resources. In Africa, most homes have few to no books. Access to the internet is prohibitively expensive, let alone having the appropriate digital devices where they can learn from and have one-to-one interactions with different virtual teachers. So many students have effectively been out of school for 9 months. And for instance, Uganda in particular, older primary students just started going to school last month, but primary schools have all now started being in session this month. So that shows you such a startling gap and reality of what the COVID pandemic has brought on all of us in terms of the raising gap between developed nations and underdeveloped nations, where there is this huge education access gap because of the lack in resources and how that continues to build. And so in order to alleviate these issues, one way to do this is to drive more opportunities for literacy into these schools. And in order to do this, schools need books. There's a famine that's going on in regards to books in much of Africa as well as Southeast Asia, and these facts are very well documented. Recently, I have been working as a global ambassador for an organization that conducts this type of work called the Literate Earth Project. They've just opened up their 18th book library in Uganda. And so what they provide is a standalone library, classroom libraries for each grade, and sets of Uganda-centric children's stories so that children are not only learning, but they're learning about their environment, their culture, and where they're coming from, which is critical. They've also implemented a Raspberry Pis, which is a low-cost computer, into libraries so that children can now have access to age-appropriate versions of Wikipedia and can actually learn how to code. And so their focus is basically on digital as well as traditional literacy. And all of this is done under the cost of 5,000 USD. So it's not a lot if you look at it from a perspective of organizations that can implement different funds or organizations that can support this initiative. There's so many different ways to help that are not just financial, that can bring more exposure to these organizations that are tackling this issue head on. And so my call to action for all of you listening, as well as youth students and leaders and global organizations, at this time, we really do need to take part and show our support for these organizations, because this issue, in terms of the pandemic we're in, it's very precarious. No one knows whether there's going to be an end date to it, when it's going to be, how this problem is going to be fixed. All that we can focus on is what's happening right now in our day to day. And one of the ways that we can do that is through making sure that education is not something that's being stunted. We can't afford that at this time, and neither can children in third world countries and developing nations who already suffer from a lack of resources. So my call is just to do your part and ensure that the same luxuries you were afforded in developing nations, the same luxuries you were afforded as a student, is not something that's compromised for them. Thank you so much for listening.